The last time I discussed this, Joe and I almost came to blows. So
no, we didn't. No, you always say that.
I would say that. We had a spirited discussion, so I wanted to give him equal time. So
I just responded to what you were saying.
You did, okay. In any event, look, banks are going to be on the agenda tonight, obviously, at this debate, and you're going to hear a lot of confusing stuff about whether the banks are getting bigger or not getting bigger. So I want to try to lay out why they are or aren't getting bigger, and then talk a little bit about Wall Street pay. So if you look at this and I say, Joe and Bernie, big banks are getting bigger, a lot of it has to do with where you measure from. If you start from the beginning of the financial crisis, 2004, you can see here that the banks, in fact, a number of them are getting bigger by reasonable sizes, except for Citibank. But that is largely because these banks made large acquisitions. They bought Washington Mutual, they bought Countrywide, they bought Merrill Lynch. And so their assets grew. If instead you take a look at the banks from after these acquisitions happened and simply what's happened in the more recent time, you see a much more modest picture. In fact, you see declines for most of the banks. A small increase here for J.P. Morgan, but Bank of America smaller, Citi smaller, Wells Fargo large, but Wells Fargo is really a retail bank based out on the West Coast. So in answer to, so Hillary's point would be the banks really aren't much bigger. The problem is a different kind of problem. It needs a different kind of solution. Let's take a look at the last thing on which there's not a lot of disagreement, which is Wall Street pay. If you go back to 1982, the average Wall Street worker in New York got roughly twice, about $100,000, what the average worker in the rest of the private economy got in New York. If you look at it today, even after the financial crisis, at $400,000 versus $72,000, the average Wall Street worker is getting 6 times. So from 2 times to 6 times over this 30-year period. Even at the time of Occupy Wall Street in 2011, the average private sector worker was getting about, the average Wall Street worker was getting about 5 times what a private sector worker was getting. So there is a real basis behind this anger toward Wall Street, this sense that Wall Street is winning and everybody else is losing.
Mike, let's go back to the big banks and Bernie's very popular theme that he's been carrying on now for years, actually. What has happened to the smaller banks that Bernie Sanders favors, the community banks, the things that he says, would be a vital part of rebuilding localized America? What's happened to them?
Up dramatically. If you look at the banks over $500 billion of assets, they've declined by about 2%. They've lost about 2% of their assets. If you look at everybody else below that, you'll see increases of 25%, of 30%, of 35%. All the growth in the banking system has gone to these smaller and middle-sized banks, the ones that he wants to help.